There is this killer point that somebody brought on the table that completely silences what the Chief of the Defense Forces and the head of our intelligence, Bwana Nuruddin Haji, were trying to tell us the other day. Actually, most Kenyans believe were trying to threaten Kenyans. And it is as follows. It comes actually from another YouTuber, a political analyst, very experienced political commentator in Kenya for many, many years, Professor Herman Manyora. Professor Herman Manyora posed the simple question. In the 90s, we all chanted, Yote yawezekana bila Moi. Everything is possible without Moi. We chanted that at meetings. We chanted that at social gatherings. We chanted it at Uhuru Park, at Kamkunji. And no head of the military came out and warned us to be careful, not to try and remove Moi using unconstitutional means. And remember, this was the old constitution. It had many gray areas. It was very repressive against the people of Kenya. A lot of it had been inherited from the colonial masters of Kenya before it attained our independence. That is the constitution, very strict. But still, nobody came to lecture Kenyans. Nobody threatened the Kenyans to stop it. Now, under a new constitution, people are saying Ruto must go. And we are being told, no, be careful. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to the sovereign, the people of Kenya. Well, there is something else that doesn't make sense, this time to the political class, to the Ruto regime. It doesn't make any sense to them. But I will explain. From our point of view, it actually makes a lot of sense. Now, since the CDF and Haji told Kenyans about this Ruto must go business, bordering on the unconstitutional, how have Kenyans reacted to it? What has been the reaction? I'm sure you know. The chants of Ruto must go have grown louder, a lot louder, and they've become much more common. University games, people are chanting Ruto must go. Where people are gathered, the chants of Ruto must go are gathering volume and momentum. Now, this may be strange to them, but it is very simple human psychology. Let me give you a very practical example, which many of us can identify with. You know, sometimes people can be very disgusting. And what landowners have done in the past, to try and curb this problem of people watering their grass with their urine, is to put up a sign. Usikojoe hapa. Some even go further. And they write, Usidhubutu kukojoa hapa. That means, don't urinate here. And then you come back a week later. What has happened? People have done exactly what the sign told them not to do. In fact, right under your sign, there is a foul smell. Is it ammonia? I was not good at chemistry. In other words, Haji and the CDF's warning about the Ruto must go chants have had the exact opposite reaction from what they're looking for. In fact, one can say they have really assisted the Ruto must go movement, because they have given them a boost. They've provoked them to greater heights of saying Ruto must go. Isn't that exactly what has happened? And indeed now it has become very predictable. where this Ruto must go chants are going. They're going higher and higher and higher. And it is a clear indication for the whole world to see. A very clear illustration, very solid evidence that President William Samoei Ruto has completely lost the mandate to be the President of Kenya, because his employers are united behind the chant of Ruto must go. Now, how long can you stay at your job when the person who has employed you, or the people who have employed you, don't want you? They want you gone, like yesterday. How long will you last on the job? Very simple question. Please give me a simple answer. Bila kizungu mingi, please. And speaking of kizungu mingi, there is something which has crept into our politics. It is very common online, that in my opinion is very disturbing. Kenyans are getting fooled. They're getting robbed in broad daylight. I am talking about this fantastic, complicated, complex, impressive in quotes, theories of people planting presidential candidates in order to favor their cause. Now, let me just be brutally honest. Most of the people peddling these theories are very naive as far as politics goes. In other words, they don't understand politics. Yeah, and this is only one of the problems, one of the many problems with these fantastic, in quotes, theories that are coming up. Let me just give you a very simple example. If today, for instance, Kalonzo Musyoka says, I am no longer vying for the presidency, will all Kamba votes automatically move to the person Kalonzo Musyoka points to? Will they? Or even a better example, if Rigathi Gachagua today tells the Kikuyu community, the House of Mumbi, that they should all vote to a man for Raila Odinga in the next election, will the whole of Mount Kenya vote for Raila Odinga? Of course not. Historically, we have learned that a large chunk of the votes of those who step out of the race, those people don't turn up to vote. And in the end, only a fraction of those who would have voted for this person who has stepped down actually vote. That is the truth. There is this ridiculous theory being floated around that unfortunately is gathering momentum, that former Chief Justice David Maraga is a Ruto candidate for the presidency. Why? So that he splits the Kisii vote. Now, even in terms of numbers, that doesn't make sense. How many votes do we have amongst the Kisii community? Would somebody want to go into all that trouble just to split the Kisii vote and ignore other huge communities like the Luo, the Luya, the House of Mumbi, etc., etc.? Does that make sense to you? Please tell me. And then these same people, to add weight to the argument, start pointing to 1992, and they start telling us that Kenneth Matiba was a Moi candidate. Yeah, Moi ensured that Matiba vied for the presidency so as to split the Kikuyu vote. Hey, now that is an insult to the legacy of the great Kenyan that Kenneth Stanley Njindo Matiba was. I will tell you what happened, because I was there. I'm not reading it in history books. And to start this saga, we have to start it right at the beginning. There was a character in the 1992 presidential elections who many people do not discuss. A character in the politics of the time, a very important very key character at the time, who people just discuss in passing. His name was Masinde Muliro. You see, I don't know why people are forgetting, the people who lived at the time, that it was Masinde Muliro who brought together Kenneth Matiba, Charles Rubia, Philip Gashoka, Martin Shikuku, Oginga Odinga, and others to form the original Ford pressure group, which later turned into a political party. Ford stood for Forum for the Restoration of Democracy. Okay? Masinde Muliro was a veteran politician at the time, who was amongst the first LegCo, the first 8 African members to be elected into parliament, the legislative council at that time. This included people like Tomboya, Oginga Odinga, Moi, etc., etc. Masinde Muliro was there. Anyway, in 1992, as the general elections approached, KANU were in panic. You see, Ford had held a massive rally at the Kamkunji grounds. It was packed, and the message was very clear. Yote wezekana bila Moi. Moi and KANU were definitely going home in 1992. For anybody who witnessed that Kamkunji rally, it was very obvious. It was very clear that even with Moi rigging, there was no way he was going to defeat in the upcoming elections this united Ford, okay, with all the big political heavyweights in one basket. And therefore Moi handlers were extremely worried. And so they came up with a plan. If you want to kill a snake, you hit it at the head. Now in this particular instance, the head of Ford was hidden. It was not obvious. Because Masinde Muliro's character was such that he worked best in the background. He didn't appear as the main person. But in actual fact, he was the glue that brought Ford together. He was the glue that held Ford together. Now, please take careful note of the fact that at this juncture, nobody talked about splitting Mount Kenya votes. Because splitting Mount Kenya votes was a foregone conclusion. Why? Because Mwai Kibaki was not in Ford. He had stubbornly refused to join Ford. And in fact, he had his own political party called DP, Democratic Party, which had been formed in December 1991. Okay? And of course, Kibaki was from the Mount Kenya region. Just like Kenneth Matiba, who was one of the heavyweights in Ford. And so as the general elections approached, Moi handlers found a solution. Very sad, but they found a solution. Politics is brutal. On August 14th, 1992, Masinde Muliro was returning on a British Airways flight from Maju, where he was raising funds for the Ford party. And shortly after landing at the JKA, he collapsed and died. Okay? Now, apparently, Masinde Muliro wore an electronic gadget which controlled the pace of the beat of his heart. A pacer. And therefore, it is widely believed that the pacer was interfered with. And that's what caused his death. Very high tech, and of course, very similar to what was done to Tanzanian President John Pombe Magufuli, for those who are members of my weekly intelligence briefings. Now, what happened immediately after Masinde Muliro passed on, confirmed that handlers of Moi had scored big. They knew exactly what they were doing. Ford split. The mighty united Ford movement, the political party, split into Ford Asili and Ford Kenya, and a smaller faction, Ford People. And Moi's plan to win the 1992 presidential elections, the very first multi-party presidential elections in the history of Kenya, that plan was complete. And of course it worked like a charm. Now it is very ridiculous for anybody to suggest that Kenneth Matiba, who was poisoned while he was in detention, while in Moi's detention, and this is what later caused him to have a stroke, and his health was never the same again until he passed on. It is ridiculous to suggest that Kenneth Matiba was a project of Daniel Toroitich arap Moi. That is ridiculous. In fact, Matiba, until his last day on earth, was very bitter against Moi. He could never stand Moi, let alone sit on the same table and negotiate to be given money so that he is a Moi candidate. Hey, people have wild imaginations. That could never have happened. And in any case, Matiba died virtually a pauper after being a multi-millionaire at one time. And so, those people need to produce evidence of how much money Matiba was paid to be a Kanu project in 1992 and where that money went. Okay? And these same disgusting people are spreading other very bizarre theories. For example, Justin Muturi, who has just been fired, is a Ruto project. How many votes are in Muturi's Mbere community? Are they even a fraction of what somebody needs to win the presidency of the Republic of Kenya? Get serious. Rigathi Gachagua is also a Ruto project. And of course, retired Chief Justice David Maraga is also a Ruto project. Now, if one were to sit and ask themselves a very simple question, how many votes do these people represent? What do they bring to the table? Because it is common sense, it is logic. Before you decide to plant a candidate, you have an objective. What kind of votes will they take? And where will they take those votes from? Very simple question. It doesn't make sense. But maybe it does. If we believe that these are government bloggers trying to confuse chafua tactics, then it all falls neatly into place. It makes sense. Because there are those who are pushing very hard for the candidature of former internal CS, Fred Matiang'i. Now hold on a minute. Is this the same Fred Baby Pendo Mada Matiang'i? Is it the same Fred Bodies in River Yala Matiang'i? Is he? Or this is a different Fred Matiang'i? What are we talking about? Oh boy. You see, even when you interview somebody for position, you have to make sure, especially if you're interviewing somebody for a very important leadership position, you have to be sure that this person is a leader. Matiang'i's greatest successes have not been as a leader. Matiang'i's greatest successes have been as a follower of instructions. President Uhuru Kenyatta told him, Matiang'i, go and reform education. Education is close to my heart. Go in there and reform it. And Matiang'i did that rather well. By the way, somebody else who is very good at following instructions, or who was very good at following instructions, is a man called William Ruto, who is now the president. We have all seen very clearly by now, he is not a leader, but he's very good at following instructions. Even as president, he has been following instructions from those promoting some very strange agendas. Dunga ng'ombe shindano, GMO food, etc., etc. And so, Matiang'i doesn't have in his CV anything to convince me that he can be an effective leader. You see, an effective leader thinks through their decisions, is able to have a giraffe vision, sees ahead, and therefore makes the decision now, seeing what is coming over there very far away. That is a leader. And very important, a leader also has character that does not allow them to do certain things. Their conscience will not allow them to do certain things. They'd rather resign, but they'll not get involved in baby pendo manenos. People of character who make very good leaders always do the right thing, even when they know that the consequences can be quite dire. Like nullifying a presidential election, something that has never been done before. I'm sure it crossed the mind of David Maraga that it was possible he was going to lose his life over that decision. I'm sure it crossed his mind many times, and the minds of those who are close to him. But he did it anyway. The character of a man. What is the character of Fred Matiang'i? What is the character of David Kenani Maraga? What is their character? Answer that question for yourself. And please, please, ignore government bloggers. Okay, hao ni watu wamelipwa. They have a job to do. Just ignore them. Please, don't be gullible. Everything you're given, just open your mouth wide and you feed on it and you eat it. No! Stop. Think. But as a golden rule, ignore government bloggers. Ignore bloggers working for politicians. Because I will not be surprised if tomorrow they wake up and start saying, Kumekucha is a Ruto project. I wouldn't be surprised. And maybe somebody would get excited and impressed. This thing is very technical, very complicated. It is a political chess move worth analyzing. Nothing like that. Until next time, this is Chris Kumekucha.